I felt the weight of the truth I held was heavier than the blocks of ice in this delivery crate. Tonight, I came here to listen to the shattering of hollow luxury. 5 years after being cast out of the rightful inheritance list, I stepped back into their world of crystal lights. The polished marble floors, the gold-plated banisters, and the scent of artificial pine tried to mask the frozen nature of this mansion.
Thomas's estate in Aspen glowed like a snow globe, perfect on the outside, but bone dry within. I told myself I was here only to perform one last role. But as soon as I set the crate of fresh seafood on the floor, Thomas's laughter cut through the Christmas music. "Don't worry, Leo," he said with a tone drenched in mockery. "We'll make sure you have enough money to buy a plate of leftovers tonight."
The room erupted in the laughter of those dressed in designer labels. Everyone laughed, except me. The banquet table glistened with crystal and silver, looking like a photograph from a high-end lifestyle magazine. The chandelier above cast a brilliant golden glow onto the expensive mahogany. That light reflected off the champagne glasses my family raised like victory trophies.
Outside, snow fell soundlessly over the mountains, covering the world in a fake peace that did not touch this room. Inside, every word uttered sparkled with the vanity of status. Every glance was like a ruler used to price the value of a human being. I felt like a ghost moving through someone else's festival. This perfection was not warm at all. It only carried the cold, rigid gaze of imposed expectations.
Thomas Grant, a 68-year-old man, still held the aura of the powerful CEO he once was. Even in retirement, he spoke as if he were still running the entire financial market. "Stocks up 20% this quarter," he said to some flatterer. The Grant name still carries formidable weight in this industry.
His wife, Vivian, fluttered beside him in red silk, constantly adjusting her diamond bracelet every few seconds. "Everything is about appearances, dear," she used to say. Tonight, she didn't need to repeat that. Every detail of this evening screamed 2 words: appearance. I looked down at my hands, calloused from fishing nets and ice. The scent of sea salt clung tightly to every fiber of my old coat.
Thomas stepped closer, frowning as if he had just smelled a landfill. "Do you plan to enter through the main door with that dead fish smell, Leo?" he asked with a look of contempt. "Use the back door, the place meant for low-level suppliers." I didn't argue, for I had learned the power of silence. I let them talk, let them believe what they needed to believe.
Because they didn't know that the fish smell they loathed was the very taste of the seafood empire they were desperately begging for. Across the table, Ryan, Thomas's son, was pouring more wine into his fiancée's glass. Ryan inherited his father's arrogance, but lacked the necessary restraint. He was the golden son, the one who stayed in the family business and did everything by the book. His fiancée, Chloe Bennett, leaned in to whisper something in his ear, and they both laughed loudly. She was beautiful in a sharp way, glittering, loud, and extremely expensive. "Leo," she said, flashing a smile that never reached her eyes. "Long time no see. Have you been busy with that little job lately?" She tilted her head as if talking to an underprivileged child. Before I could answer, Ryan chimed in.
"He's a delivery man for some small fish stalls, right?" He didn't bother to hide his triumphant smirk. Thomas smirked, reaching for his wineglass. "He didn't get fired, Chloe," he told his future daughter-in-law. "He just wasn't fit for a management role." "Everyone has their own strengths," Vivian added smoothly. "We just wanted him to find something with less pressure, that's all."
Those words surrounded me like familiar chains, polite, polished, but deeply humiliating. I kept a smile on my lips, though it was as fragile as glass. "I'm still managing everything well," I said quietly. Thomas raised an eyebrow at me. "Managing? Is that what you call lugging those stinking fish crates?" He laughed loudly once more. "At least someone is paying your rent, hopefully."
My fingers tightened around my napkin, but I remained still. This stillness was an advantage they would never see coming. I remembered 5 years ago, the day Thomas threw the report in my face in the Grant Holdings boardroom. The atmosphere then was just as thin and cold as it was now. Failure builds character, assuming you can afford to keep learning, he had said, while firing me.
At that moment, I stood paralyzed, my palms damp with the feeling of betrayal. I worked 16 hours a day, investing quietly while the world ignored me. I went through days of slow survival, eating instant noodles in a shabby studio apartment with a leaking ceiling. But from that collapse, a twist of fate arrived. I started with a temp job at a small finance firm that handled clients the Grants always despised.
Numbers always made sense to me, even when people didn't. I met Alex, a young entrepreneur rejected by the traditional financial world. We became partners and founded Morningstar Capital, which later became the Deep Blue Group. The next 2 years were spent sleeping 4 hours a night and being laughed at by investors. But I learned one thing from the Grants. People always underestimate what they cannot control. Every refusal became fuel. Every failure became data. And now, news of the Grants' decline had been sitting on my desk since last week. Grant Holdings stock was plummeting, down 40% this quarter alone. They were desperately looking for a savior investor. They didn't know that the person they were mocking at this dinner owned more shares than all of them combined. Mrs. Lopez, the longtime housekeeper, appeared from the kitchen with a tray of roasted duck. She gave me a knowing smile, the kind that said she saw more than they showed. "Merry Christmas, Master Leo," she whispered as she passed by. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. Thomas raised his glass once more. "Now, let's toast to family, even those who can't handle real business." The laughter that followed filled the room like static noise. My heart tightened, but my face remained motionless. I looked directly into his eyes and raised my glass. "To the lessons learned," I said in a calm tone. "Some of us take a little longer, but eventually we will catch up." His smile froze for half a second. Then he let out a dry laugh. "Just make sure those lessons can pay the bills, son."
In that moment, something inside me became completely still. I reached for my phone by the plate, pretending to check the time. The screen lit up with a single notification from Aldridge Private Wealth. "Mr. Grant, the verification of your $30 billion assets has been completed. Congratulations on your new account status." I blinked once, then locked the screen and put the phone away. My pulse was steady. Not yet.
The storm was about to hit Aspen, and it would sweep away everything Thomas was proud of. The snowstorm outside was no longer the quiet flakes of early evening. It had turned into a white monster, furiously clawing at the thick glass windows of the Grant mansion. The chandelier in the dining room flickered as a strong gust hit the north cliff of the estate.
Thomas set his phone down with a heavy thud, his face darkening under the candlelight. "The entire supply from the West Coast has been cut off due to the storm," he gritted out, staring at his empty wine glass. Ryan also stopped teasing Chloe, his face showing clear anxiety under his usual mask of confidence. The Grand Pearl restaurant was at risk of having nothing to serve its most important partners tonight.
Thomas turned to look at me, his gaze shifting from contempt to cold, greedy calculation. "Leo, you mentioned earlier that you have a source for fresh seafood, right?" he asked, trying to maintain a superior tone despite his predicament. I nodded slowly, feeling the cold from the crate earlier still lingering on my skin. "I have what you need for this fateful dinner," I answered briefly and calmly.
He slammed his hand on the expensive mahogany table. "Good. I'll take the entire stock at half the market price. Consider this a way to repay the help and tolerance this family has shown you for 5 years." I looked deep into his bloodshot eyes and saw a drowning man still trying to act like a great captain. In my head, the numbers of the deep blue group were dancing with a perfect, cold rhythm.
Thomas had no idea that I wasn't just a supplier. I was the one who decided who was allowed to exist in this market. Chloe let out a sneer, shaking her glittering diamond bracelet in front of my eyes. "You should feel honored, Leo," she mocked in an arrogant voice. "Without Thomas's generosity, your pile of fish would rot in this storm with no one even looking at it."
I chose silence again, but my silence was no longer one of humiliated resignation. It was the wait for an earth-shattering explosion that was about to occur. The doorbell rang, drowning out the whistling of the freezing wind outside. Charles Denning walked in, bringing with him the biting cold and the scent of power from the outside world. Thomas stood up abruptly, a fawning and fake smile immediately appearing on his aging face.
"Charles,
So glad you could make it through the heart of such a fierce storm." He introduced Charles to everyone as a savior from the powerful Deep Blue group. Charles nodded with professional courtesy, but his gaze swept quickly across the room and stopped at me. A momentary recognition flashed in the eyes of a seasoned financial expert holding massive secrets.
I gave a slight shake of my head, a tiny signal sufficient for Charles to understand that the play had not yet reached its end. The dinner began with extreme ostentation and fakery from the Grants. The fish I brought personally was served on the most expensive porcelain plates in the mansion. Thomas indulged in lecturing about the class and tradition of the business he took pride in.
To get this fresh fish, we had to utilize our exclusive connections. He lied shamelessly. Ryan continuously bragged about million-dollar projects he hadn't spent a drop of sweat to build. They turned me into a cheap topic of entertainment while sipping the premium seafood I provided. "This fish is delicious, but the taste of a poor delivery man still lingers somewhere," Ryan said, and laughed loudly.
Everyone at the table joined in, a sound that was piercing and sharp, like the sound of cracking glass. The feeling of being insulted welled up strongly, but I simply took a calm sip of red wine. I looked out the window where snow was piling thick and cold against the glass. Their vain world was also freezing like that, and they were too conceited to realize it. Chloe turned to me, her voice syrupy sweet, but filled with venom in every word.
"Leo, would you like Mr. Charles to give you some advice on how to manage your little fish stall? After all, he is the one running the billion-dollar investment funds of Deep Blue." I smiled, a smile that Thomas and Ryan mistook for lowly submission. "I think Charles already knows very well how I manage my assets," I replied with deep implication. Thumped his hand on the table, the loud noise suddenly silencing the dining room.
"Don't be insolent and delusional, Leo," he barked with a furious face. "You are merely a person who brings the value of pity to this family." Each of his words fell like cold stones onto my soul. Tension escalated to the point where I could hear the slow ticking of the antique clock. Thomas was on the brink of bankruptcy, yet he still wanted to trample on the only person who could save him.
This was the disgusting style of the Grants, maintaining a luxurious appearance even when the soul was rotten. Charles Denning cleared his throat, his face becoming extremely serious and cold. He looked at me with a questioning gaze, as if asking whether the time was ripe. I kept a non-expressive face, enjoying every dramatic second of this humiliating prelude.
The storm outside was intensifying, preparing for a decisive blow against this arrogance. And I was also ready to knock everything down. I felt the anxious gaze of Mrs. Lopez from the kitchen door watching me. She had seen me grow up, saw me being kicked out, and now saw me return empty-handed in their eyes. She didn't know about the $30 billion figure, but she knew where the true value of my person lay.
Thomas began raising his wine glass to celebrate the promising upcoming partnership with the Deep Blue Group. "This is a glorious new chapter for Grant Holdings," he declared grandiosely. "Together with Deep Blue, we will dominate the entire global premium seafood market." I wondered if he would feel humiliated if he knew that powerful representative was currently waiting for my command.
The irony of fate tonight tasted as pungent and bitter as the red wine in the glass. I remembered the freezing winter nights in that cramped studio apartment where I only had numbers for friends. Meanwhile, the Grants were laughing merrily in lavish parties like this one. They had once erased my name from every news report, treating me like a stain that needed to be scrubbed from the family.
Now, that very stain was sitting right in front of them, holding the final breath of this empire. Thomas turned to Charles, trying to display his final fake generosity. "Charles, as you see, we are still very kind to allow Leo to attend this dinner. We always value sentiment, no matter how failed or lowly that person is." Charles looked at me, then at Thomas, his lips pressed tight to prevent a mocking laugh from escaping.
"I understand, Mr. Grant. The sentiment of this family is truly special," Charles replied with hidden meaning. Dinner passed with melodious classical music, but the atmosphere was heavy with pressure. Every word from Ryan and Chloe was like a needle pricking the thin air. They had no idea that the real storm wasn't outside that door. It was present right here, among the piles of luxurious crystal and shimmering solid silver. I felt the stillness within me growing, preparing to swallow all their arrogance. Another notification vibrated softly on the phone. The entire supply system is ready to shut down. I smiled, a truly satisfied smile, no longer a fragile glass mask. It was time to end the prelude and begin the most brilliant climax. I felt a chilling silence envelop the room, with only the sound of the wind howling outside the glass window.
Everything unfolded slowly, like a slow-motion film, where every expression on their faces became grotesque. Thomas stood up, his face flushed with wine and self-conceit rising to the ultimate peak. He held the crystal glass in his hand, but instead of raising it for a toast, he pointed it directly at my face. "This party is too luxurious for the presence of someone smelling of dead fish like you, Leo.
From this moment on, I officially cut off all supply contracts with your cheap fish stall." He turned to Charles Denning with a miserable, fawning smile. "Charles, as you see, we do not accept mediocrity in our supply chain. We only work with leaders, people like your Deep Blue Group." Ryan let out a triumphant laugh, stepped closer, and splashed a bit of red wine onto my old shoes.
Hear that, brother? Get out of here and find some harbor to gnaw on your failure.
Chloe Bennet tilted her head, her diamond earrings glistening wickedly under the chandelier light. "What a pity. I thought you would be a bit more useful this evening." I didn't move at all. My heart beat a rhythmic, strange calm. Their insults now felt like tiny dust particles falling into a bottomless lake.
At that exact moment, the phone in my coat pocket vibrated once briefly. I pulled it out, the blue light from the screen reflecting in Thomas's eyes, which were narrowing in anger. The notification from Aldridge Private Wealth was clear as day, the legal owner of the supply chain and the premises of the Grand Pearl. I locked the screen and took a deep breath of the air thick with hypocrisy. You're right, Thomas. Mediocrity truly is a slap in the face of success. Thomas slammed his hand on the table, the crystal clashing with a dry sound. You dare use that tone with me? Who do you think you are? Charles Denning finally stood up slowly, adjusting his vest button with an extremely serious face. He didn't look at Thomas, nor at Ryan, who was standing stunned. Charles walked around the table, headed straight for me, and bowed deeply with respect. Good evening, Chairman Leo. All transfer procedures for Deep Blue are ready as you wished. The entire dining room fell in absolute stillness, so quiet you could hear the snow falling outside. Thomas stumbled back, the wine glass in his hand slipping from his fingers and hitting the floor. The sound of shattering glass on the marble floor rang out like a gunshot, signaling the end. Red wine loomed on the white carpet like a wound that would never heal. "Chairman? Charles, what on earth are you talking about?" Thomas stammered with a trembling voice. Ryan stood frozen in place, his earlier triumphant expression replaced by a gray mask. I looked Thomas straight in the eyes. My gaze was now a sharp blade honed through 5 years of humiliation. The Deep Blue group you so desperately wanted to partner with was actually built by me from the ruins you threw me into. The fish smell you loathe is the taste of real labor, something parasites like you will never understand. Chloe Bennet stammered, her hands clutching the fabric of her expensive silk dress. "Impossible! You're just a delivery man. How could you?" I smirked, a smile colder than the storm raging outside. I've been silent long enough to watch you dig your own graves with your arrogance. I turned to Charles, my voice echoing with power in the silent space. Charles, cancel all seafood supplies to the Grand Pearl immediately.
I don't want to see Deep Blue products appearing on the tables of those who don't value human worth. Thomas collapsed into the armchair, his breath ragged like a broken old machine. "Leo, please, we are family. You can't do this." "Family?" I repeated the word with utter disgust. "Did you call me family when you fired me in front of your entire board? Did Ryan call me family when he poured wine on my shoes just minutes ago? Your kindness only appears when you smell money, not when you see a human being." I stood up, adjusting the old coat they once considered cheap trash. "The Grand Pearl will close tomorrow morning, due to bank debt, and because there is nothing left to serve but empty pride." I looked at Mrs.
Lopez, standing in the corner, her eyes shining with silent pride. I signaled to her, a silent promise that she would always have a place in my new empire. I walked away, the sound of my heels on the marble floor sounding crisp and decisive. Behind me, the once mighty Grant Empire was now a scene of ruin. They sat there, frozen in shock, watching the back of the failure who held their destiny. The storm continued to rage, but in my heart, an absolute peace had begun to bloom. I had shown them a costly lesson. Never despise the one who brings you food, because one day they might just buy the very table you are sitting at. I stepped out of the main hall, and the cold aspen night hit my face like a pure welcome. Behind me, their world was freezing in horror and silence.
The sound of the mahogany door closing behind me was gentle yet definitive. I felt my breath vanish into the air, forming white clouds in the night. The snow continued to fall thick, covering everything in a pristine white coat, as if wanting to erase all traces of hypocrisy. I stood on the porch, looking back at the windows glowing with a yellow, weak light. Inside, I could see the Grant family still motionless at the table, a portrait of power that had just collapsed. The $30 billion figure I held now seemed lighter than the snowflakes landing on my shoulders. 5 years ago, I left this place in humiliation and empty-handed. This year, I walked away with a calm smile, not because of revenge, but because of recognition. Thomas thought I was his greatest failure, but in fact, I was the final lesson he had to learn. I was no longer the failure they always mocked, and I was not the solution to their wreckage. My true wealth tonight did not lie in the numbers in the Aldridge account. It lay in the ability to turn my back and walk away from this house without needing any approval from them. I reached into my pocket and touched the small silver cross Mrs. Lopez had just returned. The cold metal suddenly felt warm in my palm, a reminder of values more enduring than money. The phone vibrated again, a message confirming that everything was complete. Congratulations, Chairman Leo. The world is yours. I smiled, a real smile for myself. Merry Christmas, I whispered into the darkness. The private car was waiting at the end of the drive. The car's headlights pierced through the snow, leading me toward the glittering city and new beginnings. The past was no longer a weight dragging me down. It had become the firm foundation I stood upon. I proved that when no one believes in you, you are the freest person to believe in yourself. True power is peace, the quiet certainty of being free. The Grants will have to face the consequences of their own poor designs. As for me, I am ready for whatever comes next. Because success is not about the name you carry, but the belief you leave behind. If my journey has touched you,
Leave your thoughts below.